It is good to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me on. We've been trying to do this for a while.
We have, and you know what? You know what they say about just building the excitement, right? Because we're here now, it's going to be a pretty lively chat, I imagine.
Perfect. I'm excited about it.
Beautiful. So, just for the listeners, Matt, could you just give us a brief introduction? Tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, I think what most people, I do a few things, Tom. I got into the psychedelic space at a later age. I was a non drug user and had a chance to do a guided psilocybin journey. And in that very first journey, it changed the way I see the world. I reconnected with my mom who died when I was 22. She was 49. I felt incredibly safe and loved and realized I did not feel that way in my everyday life. And just had insight after insight. And I left that saying, I need to know more about this. What the heck just happened? And I went back to school and got a master's in psychology and neuroscience. And I started traveling around experiencing different psychedelics from Taita shaman, MDs, PhDs. And then that's led me after the master's to now go through it for a doctorate in ministry. Um, and I spent a bunch of time working both with medical professionals who are trying to incorporate ceremonial best practices and with spiritual leaders in the psychedelic space and how to incorporate medical best practices to help reduce risk.
Mm, mm. So many things I want to ask you, Matt. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you the first question that I thought of when I came across your stuff, which is so many people who use psychedelics for spiritual healing, personal development, whatever it is, will typically go down the artist's route after they have had an experience, right? And you went down the scientific path. And I suppose it's not necessarily there's not a consensus on what I've just said there, but talk to me about why you felt the calling to take a scientific approach to this. I know you said ministry there, and I'm sure there's many other facets as well, but what interested you in the science of psychedelic therapy?
Yeah, I was shocked. I just couldn't believe what had just happened. And my first instinct was to try to understand what happened using the science model. So I wanted to get a foundation of psychology and neuroscience. I wanted to understand, how do I read a scientific paper to even understand what does the literature say? I hadn't taken a science class in like 20 years. Um, so I just wanted a foundational understanding while doing kind of the other field work. Um, but and also as a non-drug user, Tom, I didn't know anything about any of this. So I didn't know at that time there was a decriminalization movement or why that mattered. I didn't know there were, I don't know, 200 to 2,000 psychedelic churches in America. I didn't understand any of it. So it seemed to me if I could start in science, there's literature, there's school, and that would give me a foundation. And then from there I can grow. And that's what happened. Moved quickly through that into my interest in the spiritual side, but I have a deep respect for the science, and I think we need these 300 academic institutions researching this. We need this medical model to help change 50 years of prohibition and change the public's mindset and change the politicians' mindset.
Right. Right. I actually love the way that you're using the word drug as well, right? There's so many negative connotations and baggage associated with that word, but it's such a weird thing to call a psychedelic experience or a psychedelic a drug. Like I remember the first time I, came upon mushrooms, and then MDMA and all different
Hmm.
wonderful psychedelic experiences. But to call that a drug it feels so mean almost.
Yeah, I mean, there's a famous quote, something to the effect. It's a Native American who says, "The Western man calls medicine and medicine aspirin, and yeah, we call it peyote or something." I can't remember the quote, but it is tricky because our culture carries so much baggage. We don't think about sugar as a drug. We don't think about caffeine as a drug. We don't think about alcohol really as a drug. When we say drug, at least in America, we think about just say no. This is the frying pan and the egg, and this is going to fry your brain, and you're going to get addicted, and bad things are going to happen. Um, and the reality is, there's all sorts of drugs for all sorts of purposes, and when we talk about psychedelics, particularly for spiritual purposes, I like using the word entheogen, something totally different than psychedelic or hallucinogen. It's for a different purpose. So we can talk about when it's in the medical realm, great, call it a psychedelic, call it a drug. When it's decriminalization, I think that's also accurate. When it's spiritual use, I think entheogen is the better term to use. It's God occasioning or manifesting.
Mm, mm. Do you think as well, when we start using terms like spirituality, that in itself can cause some resistance because people see spirituality as, more or less inextricably linked to religious organizations and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that mainstream religions, our institutions, have done great harm. They've done good, but they've also done great harm to a lot of groups of people. If we were to LGBTQ as just one example, um, there's also been a lot of disconnect. People have been forced to go to whatever their wisdom tradition was, listen to somebody talking about some book that they've read, and really not having a direct experience with source, spirit, creator, God, whatever term that you want to use. Um, and they bring all that baggage with them, and understandably. Um, And I think also, no, I wasn't told, I'm going to just speak for the I wasn't told growing up that I could have a direct spiritual experience. I could read about in the Bible, I could read about these people of olden year who had experiences, but I didn't think I could have. No one said, oh, you can go do this. Um, completely blown away. I mean, I lost my father, my grandmother, my mother all within a few years. And when my mom was the last to go in that series, and I was like, I'm done. There's no God. There's no anything. And in one psilocybin journey, it changed that. And I could see clearly how we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I could reconnect and feel her near me and could pull a string from her to me to my kids and know in a way that it's not something you can read.
Yeah.
It's not something I could read. So now that I'm further down the line, and I've read tons of books and experience of people, what we call the mystics of every wisdom tradition, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Confucianism. We have these people who talk about having connections with source. And they occasioned it in all sorts of different ways, some with entheogens, some without. But yeah, no one said that I can have this experience, I can have this knowing. And I love being here. What's your experience with this?
I just, if you want the honest truth, Matt, I took about 3.5 grams of psilocybin with a friend after
Hmm.
school, actually, when I was about 16. And uh, I didn't know really what to expect. I wasn't particularly um, closed minded or open minded. And we just went for a walk, and it
Mm.
was a wonderful, wonderful experience. It was a kind of a rainy day, but I just remember when it started kicking in, I sort of started seeing the underpass of a freeway uh, vibrating a little bit. And I can remember still seeing almost like what I thought was like a possum sort of running through the vibrations, that sort of like feeling that a mushroom gives you. I was like, oh, this is a little bit strange. And then I started to get a little bit nervous. But
Mm.
because my friend had already done them before, he was a beautiful sitter. And I was like, man, like, what the hell's going on? He's like, and he was just very affirming, right? Which, as we know, is so important. Like, if you see a door, go through the door, of like, be
Hmm.
interested in the experience, right? And it made me feel safe. So then I started looking at trees and plants, and I've never really done that. And they just the green of a tree seemed more green, or a little purple flower seemed more purple, and I had this feeling of probably quite similar to you, Matt. Not necessarily anything revelatory, especially in my first experience, but just this feeling of wow, there's a lot I don't know about myself and a lot about the world. And that was really wonderful to stumble upon, And then yeah, just have had some successive experiences after, most commonly with psilocybin and MDMA, and MDMA especially for healing in my relationship, and then some
Mm,
personal insights too. It's it's I think what I'm taking from what you're saying, and then certainly to back up my experience, to know that there's so much that we don't know just keeps you very grounded, almost in a bizarre paradox. Um, it's great, and it's really motivated me to learn from people and to grow, and whether that's even just not necessarily having these experiences all the time, but just I wonder what I can learn from this book. I wonder what I can learn from this person. And what science, what I really love about what science has shown us is to measure some of the personality differences, how some of these experiences, and I'd actually love for you to speak to this, but they do make you more open to experience, right? They do actually shift some of these personality constructs. But open mindedness, I would say, is probably the biggest thing that it's given me.
that's beautiful. And certainly they can do those things. And I think just to quickly, I mean, we're 10 minutes in. I just for the listeners, um, these are beautiful tools. These are beautiful. I'm going to go so far and actually stay here at minute 11 that these are not cures for anything. These are catalysts. These are tools for awakening, for awareness, for understanding, for remembering who you are, remembering where you came from, remembering who you are, your essence, for connecting into the interconnectedness of all things. Um, and then the work is everything that happens afterwards. It's every other day of the year. And you can take that openness and you can take that neuroplasticity and use it to train your mind for the positive and all sorts of amazing things. But going backwards for just a minute, these are tools and there are risks associated with them. So um, these aren't. Well, my book is called one of my books is Psychedelics for Everyone. I don't literally mean that everyone should take a psychedelic. There are people who are not firmly enough rooted in this world where it's not safe for them to journey into that world. There are people who are on certain medicines where one psychedelic might be more dangerous than another psychedelic for them. So what we talk about is source, set, and setting. And if you pay attention, source is where did your drugs or medicine come from? Set is your mindset. What is your intentions and mindset going in, and where are you? And then your setting is the physical environment around you. If you pay attention to those things, just like you had a good sitter for your first experience, the probability of having an adverse, truly adverse event is very low. But if you don't pay attention to those things and you just buy something off the internet, or you take them in a crowded place with people you don't know, or you're in a very vulnerable position. So just be aware of that. I'm a huge, obviously, proponent of these medicines, and I just want people to keep the risks as low as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why science is so important, right? And so perhaps we can segue nicely into some of the research that really prompted you to take this a step further, and what we can learn about psychedelics and psychedelic experiences from a scientific perspective. Um, because these are powerful things, and there are some ways that they can be wildly positive, and then they can send people off into the ether, right? So let's segue into this, Matt. So what is going on in the brain when someone is having a psychedelic experience? I know that's a very broad question.
It is a broad question. It does vary from medicine to medicine, but I'm going to talk just high level, take this as a general answer, and there are differences between psychedelics. But at the first thing that happens is what we think of as the default mode network, that front of our brain, the inner narrator that is constantly telling us you're not enough, you need to do more. That's quieted down. And when that happens, many people experience this feeling of the weight of the world being lifted off their shoulders, and this kind of eerie quietness of, ooh, wow, it's calmer. The Then what starts to happen is neurons that haven't fired together in a long time start to fire. Um, And this allows connections to be made that aren't normally made. So the analogy that I love is you're skiing down a mountain, and as we get older, we keep skiing down the same track over and over and over until to the point where we can't ski down any other part of the mountain. We forgot that it's there. The psychedelic puts a fresh coat of powder. Now all of a sudden we can ski across the mountain and we remember, oh, I don't have to think about this the way I've been thinking about it. I can think about it this way or that way. Um, and what's kind of amazing about psychedelics is you can remember what you thought about later. And that's when we get into how do you implement change. But so that happens where these neurons start firing, your brain lights up, which is incredible. Many people at this point also have some type of, again, depending on how much you take, some type of spiritual experience where they feel that they're not separate and apart from nature, but that they are nature. And that while we are different waves, we're all part of the same ocean. And that there is something else out there, that some creator spirit source thing that is that connects us all and that we come from. Um, and depending again on why you've taken it, that can be really comforting, especially for those of us who are experiencing loneliness, to feel like we're not alone in the universe. And then the other thing that happens is it turns off, some of these medicines turn off shame, blame, and guilt and allow us to relook at things that have happened in our lives with a fresh pair of eyes and a no bad anyone mentality. Oh, wow, I did do this and I wasn't acting as aware or awake as I wish I was, but that's okay. I now see that, and now I can make amends or move forward or forgive in many cases. And all of those things together is kind of, yeah, what makes these really, really powerful medicines for anything that involves repetitive thinking patterns. So obviously we can talk about depression or anxiety, but we can also talk about how these are being used for OCD, for eating disorders, for substance use challenges, for autism, really anything that has repetitive thinking at its core. The psychedelic can break up and show us a different way. And then we enter into the integration period where we now have to remind ourselves and teach ourselves to operate with that new framework.
Has your research changed, Matt, how you think human beings create meaning? There's a
Mm.
whole crisis of meaning at the moment people often talk about. People can't find a sort of meaningful existence. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting to, again, speaking for the eye, I really don't know from a scientific perspective how these medicines add meaning, but I do know is this. I do know that these tools, I'm going to go back to the word entheogen because historically that's the only use. They were used in spiritual practice going back thousands of years. And let me just actually stick on this for a moment. There are cave paintings in Africa that are thousands of years old that show mushroom shaman. There are Siberian shaman. There are history in China, in India, all throughout Europe. We know how many witches were burned for their uses of plant medicine. We know Central America, South America. We've all read in our history books about the Native Americans and their use of peyote. But I bring this up to just take a moment to remind us all that we all have a psychedelic lineage. Now, the church and the state tried to suppress it, and with really, really harsh penalties, death, flogging, terrible, terrible things. If these weren't effective, that would have put an end to them, but it didn't. This again, religion with no name has never stopped operating. It didn't stop in the last 50 years of prohibition. It didn't stop in the 400 years of colonialism. It didn't stop as Christianity and Islam spread throughout the world. It continued. Um, so I bring that up as a kind of an encouragement to it. These aren't just for our Native American and Indigenous brothers and sisters. We all have a right to these tools. For me, the meaning of this, first, when I connected with Source in a way that I didn't understand, there was meaning there. There's just meaning immediately. And then when I started unpacking who I am and got down to at my core, I'm just this loving ball of light. And then everything stacks on top. Every story is a layer on top of that ball of light. Who I am, what my personality is, what my job is, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a friend, I'm a this and the other thing. There's story upon story upon story. And I have the opportunity to choose what story. This is my life. I have lots of
Mm.
opportunity to shift and to change things, and to take responsibility. So for me, the meaning, it just became apparent. And every time I sit with these medicines, I reconnect with my sacred, and I get a chance to look back inside and see what am I not aware of right at this moment that maybe I should work on for the next few months.
There's so many powerful implications in what you just said there, Matt. My therapy hat is screaming. It's
Yeah,
beautiful. So it's what I took from that is the meaning was created very quickly for you the less you identified with your ego and the more you identified with being one or a part of something greater than yourself, which I think is so
absolutely.
interesting, right? In terms of the meaning crisis of the 21st century, it's like we're sort of set up to bolster our ego, status and money and whatever. Like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And it's so fragile. And the more we can break that down, even though that's quite scary. And, therapy would sort of do that in a very systematic way. But sometimes people can feel that that takes too long. Uh, is a sort of coming back to this awareness of uh, the ocean in a drop. So I suppose
Hmm.
is what I took from what you were saying.
I really like all of that. I think I have an 18 and a 20-year-old, and I think about the soup that they swim in. And part of me says, oh my goodness, what an incredible time to be alive, that we have so much abundance, so much abundance with security around housing and food and all of our needs, that we can focus on what we want to be called. I think it's beautiful. And we have time to identify as this, that, or the other thing. I think it's all beautiful. And I do worry sometimes that they spend a lot of time trying to change the road ahead of them versus changing how they perceive the road. Um, and how sometimes it's like, I'm not feeling well, and I'm going to get a prescription for you. I need you to change the way you address me for me to feel better. So I don't love that piece of this, but I do
Yes.
love the individualism and the expression that's there. Um, I'll take this in a quick side journey here around the block. I also really do believe what this isn't an accident that we're having this conversation tonight. It's not an accident that these medicines are coming back up at the same time that AI is coming up, at the same time that
Mm,
renewable energy is getting cheaper, at the same time that vertical farming is using 95% less water and 97% less land, at the same time as we're learning how to grow meat in labs, at the same
mm,
time as nanotechnology is making our great impacts in human longevity. At It's an incredible time to be alive, and when we get to this point where our needs are even more met, and the need to make money as we have, the need to live in a scarcity based in culture goes away. Well, that again, we then what is the meaning behind why are we here? What does it mean to be connected? What does it mean to do anything? Becomes more important of a question. And we don't spend enough time at all in our schools talking about this. We don't have it in our lives talking about this. So again, just couldn't be more excited to be alive right this second, while all of these things are conspiring to make the world a better place.
do you think you would have stumbled upon the work that you do and having the life that you have without that initial psychedelic experience? I suppose the reason why I ask that is sometimes I can't tell whether or not we're entirely free or whether the universe is entirely deterministic. And I like a synthesis of the two. I like compatibilism there. But I wonder sometimes whether or not we would have found it in different ways or whether it really did take that moment. It was almost like a sliding doors moment for you.
Yeah, I think the I think the universe conspired to put me in that situation to have that experience to bring everything else that's happened in my entire life to this exact moment moving forward. But when I think about how many accidents, how many trillions upon trillions of things had to happen for me to be alive right now, and then to have that experience and to have this background to be able to take this forward, yeah, this is what was meant to be. So I do believe that we are creatures. We have free will, and the universe is working for us. And that this is our movie, and we're here to create, and we're here to love. Um, but I don't think we're here to hoard, and I don't think we're here to. I don't think we're here to be afraid, and that's everywhere. I think that this notion of abundance and scarcity is something I think a lot about. That the culture I grew up in, and I grew up in an East Coast, a kind of a tough East Coast America town, where it felt like there wasn't enough for everybody. And I was told like you got to get what's yours, and you've got to study hard in school to go get to the right college, to get the right job, to build the biggest company, to on and on and on. It's all very competitive, and it's all very fear based. And it leads to people not taking vacation and not spending time with their family and not spending time with their friends. Um, and the more I work in this space, it's like, oh my God, if I just pause for a moment and feel the earth supporting me, that feels good. If I pause for a moment, go outside and just take a minute to look at this kaleidoscope of colors that are around me, that feels good. Um, there's support everywhere, and there's all these creatures and plants that are conspiring to keep us alive. Um, and there's plenty. There's plenty. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of shelter. I don't need the things that I hold on to. And that's a process for me. I hold on to way too much, but it's fun to watch and notice and start unraveling.
So why do we forget? Why do we forget about the abundance?
I think there's a ton of programming. Everybody around us, the culture is sick, and I mean that in a loving way. And I'm part of the culture, but I don't. So I'll give this example. Again, I'm talking about 18 and 20-year-olds. I'm talking about I look around and I see how many kids are being diagnosed with anxiety and experiencing depression. And then I think for a minute, well, wait a minute. They know they have nuclear weapons pointed at us. And at some level, that's got to be scary.
Mm,
And in our country, we have had all these school shooting drills. Well, they go to school every day knowing that they might be involved in one. And when we drive down the street, we know that people are armed. All of that is anxiety. As far as my entire life has been, we've been at war as a country, through multiple conflicts and all over. So at some level, whether we're actually a soldier and doing the work, or we are taxpayers and paying for the work, we're all involved in this industry. There's no clean hands on any of us. So there's got to be some anxiety there, and then we have this whole culture of competitive. There, you've got to get into the best school, and no, we had a whole thing in our country of no child left behind, as if not going to college meant you're not as worthy as someone else, as if that's something wrong. If you choose to become an electrician or a plumber, that just doesn't make sense to me. But
mm,
it's just the normal soup we swim in. So we forget because we we look back at like take the teachings of Jesus. You're supposed to turn the other cheek, but our society says nope. Sorry, if we have to more death penalty, more punishment for crime. So we it's harder for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. Well, no, you've got to accumulate as much as possible, and it's just contradiction after contradiction after contradiction. So, yeah, it's easy to forget when everything around us are superheroes. How do you destroy evil through violence? Okay,
mm.
that's what we're told. It's what we saw in our games, on and on and on. So, I'm talking a little bit longer than I like to here. It's just, I think it's prevalent. I think it's everywhere, and I think we need more of us saying, no, no, it doesn't have to be that way. And violence isn't the answer. And there is enough, and there's nothing to be worried about. And we can do better. We can do
Right.
better.
Right. So it's easy to forget because our culture doesn't invite us to remember.
As a whole, everywhere we look in our culture, whether it's our social media feeds, whether it's our work environment, even our families, the news, the media, the video games, the movies, the magazines. Yeah, you've got to have this body type.
Mm,
You've got to drive these cars. You have to have this watch. It's everywhere, and it's nonsense.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's okay. No bad anybody. It's
Yes.
just, but it's easy to forget. Which again brings us back to community. So we talked about medicine not as a cure, as a catalyst. We've talked about the work we do afterwards to integrate what we saw, and then we didn't say the word, but I talk about community. When you come out of these experiences, ideally you move into a consciousness community, a community that you can have these conversations that can remind you it's not this, it's that, and can look at you and say, you are beautiful and you are loved and you are worthy and you are enough. And this has got to be hard. Tell me more about this.
Yeah. I love that. I want to talk about religion, Matt. This is
Okay.
something that I really wanted to talk about with you. Obviously, focusing on ministry, and I've heard a lot of gurus, and specifically Ram Dass, who I love very much.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke about when he went to India. He had he sort of recognized that there were blueprints and maps for this stuff that he was playing around with at Harvard, I believe it was. What's going on with religion? What let me see if I can ask this in a way that I really want to ask it. What do people need to know about religion so that religion can help them?
There's a Sufi quote that says, "Love the pitcher less and the water more." And we, I, conflate organized religion with a connection with spirit. Um, so I think having whatever it is for you, for me, my own relationship with spirit, however that looks, is the most important thing. Sometimes, often, that can be in the form of a community of people who have a similar relationship with spirit or have agreed to get together and at least share their thoughts. So it can be like a Unitarian community where, okay, you can be a wide range of things, but you're agreeing to come together as community periodically to worship. It can be Quaker, where you're going to sit in silence and let everybody's light shine until someone feels like speaking. And it can look like a Roman Catholic service. It's different things for different people, and it's all okay. Um, there is a long history, though, of people trying to find that direct relationship with spirit. We had a Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther saying, "Okay, let's give people the book themselves so they can read." Beautiful. And he put his life at risk. He was a heretic for doing that. Well, I believe we're in the middle of the next Reformation, which I'm calling the entheogenic Reformation, where now we're going to move away from the book and we're going to move away from the preacher. And we're going to go into direct spiritual experience that's predictable in terms of the ability to occasion it, and that's risk reduced. So you don't have to go to the desert for 40 days. You don't have to sit in a dark cave for periods of time. You don't have to hit yourself with metal whips. You don't have to have epilepsy. You can occasion these using a precise tool and or a more precise tool, and see where that takes you, and then decide what you want to do with that information.
So, is there a risk there that with now everyone having the ability to have that direct experience with God, that the cohesiveness and the sort of the group identity that religion can offer us will start to fade away?
No, I don't believe so, because and as you said it yourself, many people who experience this feel unity, feel interconnected. And I just believe if we look at the teachings of the great prophets, the teachings are pretty much love your brother as yourself. Um, take care of your neighbor. Don't steal. Don't kill. It's not. Um, don't allow these people to get married.
Mm.
It's it's all love. It's breaking down the walls. So I think there will be just a different type of wisdom tradition that emerges that is maybe less patriarchal, maybe less hierarchical, um, way more inclusive, and less judgmental. Um, yeah, it's very interesting. There's a lot of judgment in the institutions today, and a lot of decisions of, oh, what you're doing is not okay. Hmm, okay, but what this person's doing is okay, and it seems silly to me. Yeah, I'm not. I don't think that's not a worry I particularly am concerned about.
Yeah. I mean, me neither. But I suppose I've heard that, in various forms. People talking about how uh, one of the offerings that religion can do in its organized form is keep people sort of unified under a way to live. And when you sort of explode the rule book, right? Um, the fear, I suppose, which then is counter to what a psychedelic can offer you if you integrate it appropriately, uh, is, well, now everyone's just going to run around. It's almost that Nixon-esque idea, you
So,
know.
yeah, stick with this for a second. So part of me says, okay, I understand what you're saying from a Marxist perspective of religion is the opium of the people. Let's put that aside for a minute, um, because I want to invite in people who have all deep beliefs in their religious institutions. There's a I went to a workshop recently with spiritual leaders of mainstream religions, all using psychedelics, and looking to use psychedelics, incorporate it into their being a spiritual leader. And I'm talking about Methodists, Presbyterians,
Mm,
Episcopalians, Quakers, Unitarians, Jesuits. I mean, it was a cross section of mainstream religion. I know there's a group out there called Ligare, run by a person named Hunt Priest, doing beautiful work uniting Christians who are interested in psychedelics. There's another group, I think, called Hefe, that's working with people of Jewish faith in psychedelics. There's a number of different Muslims, scholars, and people working on how do you use this as an and to. I have a deep Christian belief, and I'm going to use entheogens to deepen it. I want a deep Jewish faith, and I want to use entheogens. I think that's really interesting because, again, I come back to most days you're not using a psychedelic or an entheogen. And during those days, what is your practice? What is your contemplative practice? What are the prayers you're going to say? How are you going to say them? Where do you gather? Where do you gather to do? Many people find a desire to serve as part of their practice. So much good stuff is done in churches across the country. So I see entheogens as an add-on for the churches that choose to accept them. Um, and I do see it as a threat for those that don't.
mm.
And for those that want to be prescriptive, these are the rules. This is how you act, and I'm going to judge you. Yeah, these aren't a good fit. But for those who truly are living it by the words of the great prophets, these are amazing.
If we start to take psychedelics as a culture, right,
Mm-hmm.
and they do become sort of like the first thing that the first place that my mind took me to there is the bread of Christ becomes
Mm-hmm.
sort of flavored with a bit of psychedelic, right? And we can have a very wonderful contemplative experience, which which by the way I'm for, provided that it's regulated and so on. Like one of the things I'm trying to do here, Matt, is because there's so much I agree with you on, I'm trying to play devil's advocate to myself to have a
Mm-hmm.
look at where my blind spots are, right? One of the things I often think about is if the borders between different religions break down, what is their utility behind being a Christian or being a Buddhist or being a Jew? Kind of like the Aldous Huxley's perennial philosophy, are they different maps that are all pointing to the same thing, or do they have different sort of strengths and weaknesses in and of themselves?
So there's certainly a lot of traditions that would say there are many paths up the mountain, but there's only one unity. So take whatever path you want. Unity is unity. Um, I can't help but think about how do we walls keep people apart. So these different teams of, I mean, how many Protestant variations are there? Flavors of a different team. We talk about Christians as if they're a single group, but the difference between an Eastern Orthodox and a Roman Catholic and a Quaker, pretty significant, and an Amish, significant. I think about why were these walls put up? Why are our national walls put up for the most part? And it's scarcity. It's people trying to hoard and control and take, um, for lots of reasons. Um, but I can't come back. I can't imagine when we live in an abundant world, when we have an abundant mindset, when we know and remember there's plenty, just enjoy. And we take away that anxiety of I've got to do more to get ahead. I need to save more in case the last 7 years of my life I have to go into a home. I I mean, we live in a culture here where your health care isn't guaranteed. So I've got to work to, oh my goodness, if I don't get a job and then I get sick, I'm in big, big trouble. Um, that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure. Um, we're in a country here where college can be $100,000 a year, $400,000 a year for a kid to get an undergraduate education. It's a lot of pressure on parents, and then it's a lot of pressure on the kids. They know they just spent a ton of their parents' money. Um, I don't know. I think anything that tears down walls is good. Anything that brings people together is good. There's a beautiful Howard Thurman quote where he talks about talking about in humanity as an abstract doesn't do anybody good. These are people who have names who live in streets, and these people are you and me, and we this is our one life. We should be able to enjoy it, and we should be able to explore it and explore our minds and explore our hearts using nature. That should be a fundamental right for all of us, not just for those who can afford to do it, and not delivered to us by people who have studied a specific thing that has nothing to do with maybe why we are exploring.
Yeah. So then the opposite side to tearing down walls would be sort of, although it is important to demarcate and categorize, right, and make distinctions so that we can find our way through the world. So do you see a synthesis in those areas? Like, is it the case that one of the benefits of psychedelics for our current society is that we've become so discriminatory and categorical that we, like you said before, that metaphor, we've just become so adjusted to this particular pathway down the mountain that it really is a time now where we need to sprinkle that powder, see the unity again, and then perhaps categorize to make sense of the world in ways that are better for us, essentially.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. I mean, we have here people leaving across the world, actually, people leaving their organized religion in record numbers. I think for millennials, something like 30% don't identify with anything. And I think 40%, I can't remember the exact statistic, say that they're spiritual of adults say they're spiritual but not religious. So the leaving of the churches has happened. And then we look around and we have like our Surgeon General saying we have a loneliness epidemic where people are getting up, they're getting in their cars, they're going to their jobs, or they're working on their Zoom things, they're coming home, they're eating, they're exhausted, they're going to bed, and there's no fun, there's no play. And in many of the jobs, there's not a lot of autonomy. So there's no play at work. I think all of that leads to this culture of anxiety and loneliness that we are experiencing, that we're in the midst of. And just again to remind, so put that in a bucket, and poverty is down, food costs are down, technology costs are down, wages are up. So it's again incredible, so many positive things, but we don't see those things on the news. We see what's bleeding, and we're hearing it from repetition over and over and over. Bad, 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 bad. So again, shaking it off. Oh, wait a minute. What a beautiful time to be alive. And why do I feel lonely? Why do I feel anxious? What am I scared about? And how do I get a different view of how do I get a different reality? And these medicines can do that with, again, delivered with source set and setting, and ideally in a community where there's an integration process possible to help unpack the things that you see.
Mm, mm.
Did I
So then
answer
what
that?
did,
I'm not sure if I just took us on a tangent there.
hey, if you're on the My Made podcast, this is what we're supposed to be
There
doing.
we go. Okay, I'll take it.
That's great. So what is loneliness then, Matt, to you? Is it a disconnection from self? Is it just disconnection from other people? What's going on there?
Oh, I love that. I mean, and yes, it's all of it. Loneliness is I am missing the love of my parents. I'm missing the love of my community. I'm feeling alone in this world. Loneliness is we are on this blue ball in the middle of space, and we're alive for a flash, and then it's over. Um, and I'm not connected to anything else. Loneliness is I walk past these green walls of bushes and trees, and I don't even see them, and don't recognize that there's other things with consciousness, just different, supporting my life all around me. I just don't see it. It's not brought to my attention. Um, Loneliness is forgetting all of that and being so focused on some goal that I've set to do something that, in the grand scheme of things, just doesn't matter. And I'm not saying to tune in and drop out. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying to tune in and play, and tune in and create, and tune in and connect. Um, but I know for me, I spent a lot of time building businesses and just moving the goalpost. I'll be happier when I have 100 employees. I'll be happy when I have 500 employees. I'll be happy when I have a building with my company name on it. I'll be happy when every time I hit a goal, the goal moved. Um, Now I'm just happy. It's just different because the goal is to be alive. The goal is to breathe every day. The goal is to connect with spirit every day. The goal is to have conversations like this every day. And what I do to generate resources can be aligned with this, and it's just a different way of living, different way of going through the world.
So then I wonder if whether it's something within us specifically, and we've danced around this, Matt, this idea that, we've been set up and raised in a culture that has some wonderful strengths. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I could not agree with you more. It's so wonderful to be doing what I'm doing right now with you on the other side of the world. It's fucking brilliant, right?
It's amazing.
And yet, so our material living standards are really good, but we've lost this sense of connection to self and to other and to community and to source that I think is really, really necessary and sort of leads into the loneliness epidemic. And I wonder now whether or not it does take something like a psychedelic for a human being, right? As a mammal is what I'm speaking to now, to remember the connection. Or if we're set up in a culture that promotes that stuff, whether that would be enough. What do you think's going on there? Like, I suppose my question is, are we wired to be individualistic, and then we need culture, then we need other things to get us back on the path? Or yeah,
Yeah, we're told in our Western culture that we are wired this way, and that we're closer to chimpanzees than, bonobos and on and on. And yet we know that there are parts of the world where they have nothing comparatively, where they're living on a few dollars a day and the happiness ratio is higher. So we know there are ways to feel connected. There are ways to have community, to have connection with source. Um, yeah, and we know there are many different ways up the mountain. So for me, when I speak for the I, an entheogen made a ton of sense and it worked. Others, they're going to find their connection through a different means, and that's okay. And I think that's kind of the beauty of us being humans. But I don't think all humans need entheogens. I don't think, but I do think we need. I think we will shift to an abundance mindset, and I think everything is conspiring: technology, politics, medicine, food, energy, entheogens to lead us here. Um, Yeah, but I don't. It's not the entheogen specifically that is required for any human. I do also think when I think about your work, I mean, you did a bunch of different. You did telehealth for mental health. You've done
Mm.
a suicide line where people would call. What again? The fact that those services are available, that you can reach people who are having a crisis and provide immediate assistance. Those tools weren't available 100 years ago,
Yeah.
and we just take them for granted now. We forget how far we have come. We have awful, awful, awful suicide happening in our country with our veterans,
Mm.
and compared to historic suicide levels, they're down. We can do better, and we certainly can do better for that population. So again, I keep it's amazing, and we can do better. I keep coming back to that theme.
Yeah. But it's such an important conjunction. It's not either or. It is and. I think
Hmm.
that's so, so important. When the world that we live in really loves the either or, left,
They do.
right, it's just insane.
Well, it
Um,
divides. It's the walls. It's the division leads to the division leads to me being scared that someone's going to that team, that religion, that business, that other student is going to take what's mine, and that leads to then behavior of I need to check the news 17 times a day. I need to look at my social media feed and see what's going on because at the core, I'm scared. I might not call it that. I might call it, oh, we have anxiety and we need to take medicines to numb these symptoms. But that's what's happening. We are scared. And we're being told to be scared through these divisions. Um, and it's not needed.
yeah. Yeah. But it creates a sense of safety almost, right? I'm just thinking like, if it's not needed, why are we doing it? And if I'm growing closer to Matt through the mutual hatred of someone else, that makes me feel like you've got my back because I know that we may not know each other, but we definitely hate that guy, right? So there's that. It's the sort of the primal stuff that we're trying to sort of sift through at the moment. I wonder.
Yeah, I think what I'm questioning is, and again, I know this is going against a lot of literature. I'm not sure it's primal. I believe it's
Mm.
taught. I mean, there's so many examples of. So I'll give a silly. There's actually a beautiful book. Have you read Humankind?
No.
Beautiful book, and he basically goes through chapter after chapter of kind of left their own devices. How did humans behave? And the one example he gives, he contrasts Lord of the Flies, the book, which we've all read, and okay, this is what's going to happen if we leave these kids to themselves, to an actual situation where a group of kids were shipwrecked on a deserted island. And what did they do? And they got along and they worked as a team and they didn't mock people and destroy it. They were lovely to each other and helped each other and got through the experience and lived to tell about it. So I don't believe, I have a hard time accepting these are primal natures. I get that there is a unite against a common enemy is something we've been told and does work. It's an effective technique, but I'm not sure if the uniting against a common enemy actually makes me feel better or if it just makes me feel surrounded. Um, Yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know.
So I wonder then if it's, even though it is within us, it's emphasized whereby we could just as easily emphasize these better aspects of the self, right? The line between good and evil goes through the heart of every individual, right? Um, yeah, I see that because I see at the same time, like, if I take an internal family systems therapy approach,
Hmm.
right? I've got these little people within me, and there's fear, and there's anger, and there's resentment, but there's also these other equally powerful voices that say, hey, like, if you're the president, if you're the prime minister, Tom, decide, decide. And then what around me in my ecosystem is going to influence me to make that decision? Is it going to be things that are, to your point, Matt, promoting scarcity, promoting fear, promoting competitiveness, or promoting abundance and love and unity and connection?
Yeah, that's beautiful, Tom. And then the Native American equivalent is there's a dog and a wolf in each of us, and who's going to win? It's whoever you feed.
Mm,
That yeah, we all have the ability to be whatever it is we want. The other book I love is a book called Summerhill, and this is a book about a school in England where they would take kids where nothing else worked, and there were no rules. There was no curriculum. Students could study whatever they wanted. They just couldn't interfere with other students. And what happened, even for the quote worst kids, within 6 months, they wanted to learn and they chose to learn and they didn't pick on each other and they treated each other kindly and they just needed the space to develop. And we are so quick to put people into boxes. We talk about attention deficit. The problem with attention deficit, we have 30 kids in a room with one teacher. There's not enough attention to those kids. And that's not how we were equipped. That's not how we were brought up to learn. That's how we were taught. That's how we learn to work in a factory.
mm,
It's not how we learn here. And
God,
yet, if you can afford to have less kids in a classroom, and you can afford a private school, and can afford those things, it's beautiful. But most of us can't. So I just anything that comes to it's this is how we are. This is the primal. I'm not accepting that at face value as much anymore.
yeah, I love that. And when we do a round two, because I definitely want to have
Mm,
another conversation with you, Matt. I think that would be so powerful to get into how we classify, mental health conditions and what that looks like in certain cultures, and where that can lead to in reference to Gabor Mate's work and
hmm.
not just labels themselves. I think but I think you and I will have a fun time speaking to labels and categories from a philosophical and spiritual perspective. I think is to more of a mental health perspective. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah. So an easy way is to go to mattzeman.com. You can see all my books and podcasts and different things there. My next book is The Veteran's Guide to Psychedelics. It's coming out in September. And there's also for those who are therapists or coaches who are listening, there will be a therapist coaching version that I'm co-authoring with Ken Weingart, PhD, who's with the Veterans Association for 20 years, therapist, rock star. So that's going to be a great tool if you're working with veterans and how to use the guide with them. And then Psychedelics for Everyone is my first book, available on anywhere books are sold. And there's also an Audible version. And then Beyond the Trip is a workbook for preparation and integration. So again, easiest way, mattzeman.com or LinkedIn or Instagram are the three kind of places I hang out. And yeah, would love to hear from you.
My final question to you, Matt. What
Sure.
happens when we die?
What happens when we die? We move on to the next space.
I love that.
Beautiful. It's a
I really,
transition.
I love
Yeah,
that. I
it's
always try
easy.
to put a final question there. I think what I'm taking from that is just most of the time when I ask a question like that, right, someone will have a thought of what that next place looks like,
Mm,
you know. And I think what's so beautiful about being open minded is that moving on to the next place doesn't actually give you any definitive certain answers to what that place is, right? Whether it is the end of consciousness or it is this other realm or whatever it is. But all we do know for certain, right, is that we do move on to the next place. And there's a beautiful, even in the way you said it, there's a beautiful um, just calmness, I suppose, as opposed to like in terms of not needing to know the outcome and that being okay. I think that's a really wonderful place to end.
I appreciate that. I think having the good fortune to be able to experience what that energy feels like, to transform away from me and my body into just energy, and then be like, okay, I get it. I could see how, if we're all just energy, how we could stack a whole bunch of us into this space. Um, I love that. And then also to have the fortune to, what would the Greeks say, to die before you die, is incredible. And these tools can help people experience that. Um, they can help people who are having end of life um, experiences of depression, anxiety, understandably, come to a different understanding of what's happening. And they can help with the friends and family who are bearing witness to those events see it in a different manner. And all of that is beautiful because we all are going to die and we all are going to experience that in our lives. And we have so many more things we could talk about, but this is such a one of the beautiful things about this medicine is helping, if nothing else, for that.
Yeah. Matt, thank you so much.
Tom, I appreciate you reaching out, getting up early in the morning, doing this with me. This is it took a lot to make this happen, and I appreciate you very much. Yeah, thank you for bringing this message to your audience, and for choosing to invite me on.
And I would love to do it a second time and perhaps
All
even a
right,
third and fourth. It'd be awesome.
we can make that happen. I want to come down there. We'll do it in person.
I would love that. That would be so cool. Yeah,
That'd
that'd
be
be
so
awesome.
cool.
We'll make that happen.
That's a deal.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Matt.